So good morning, everyone. Good morning, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen. It's with a great pleasure that on behalf of all the organizers, I welcome you here in Brussels and to this international conference on social protection in context of fragility and forced displacement. A particularly warm welcome to all of you who come from far away to a fairly cold and rainy day, but we have hope. In Brussels, it's always, the sun shines always after the rain, that's what they say. So my name is Sandy Blanchet, and I'm the director of the UNICEF office here in Brussels for relations with EU institutions. And as a convener, UNICEF has worked very hard with all its partners, the European Union, FAO, Finland, Germany, Swedish SIDA, UK Aid, UNHCR, WFP, and the World Bank to bring this conference together. And I would like to salute all our colleagues and partners in the room who are from these organizations. We are very pleased to have with us today over 150 participants. Actually, the people you see in this room are only part of it. There is another room where we have more colleagues who are also watching us on TV. And all of you are coming from government delegations, as well as development and humanitarian partners, civil society, research institute, and civil society, as I said before. And I would like particularly to acknowledge the presence of several high-level representatives, ministers, and state secretaries from several countries. We're very happy to have you with us today. It shows the commitment of your countries that you decided to spend a few days with us, and also the importance of this particular topic for your countries, but we think also globally. So we look forward to having 2 days of learning, exchange of information. We hope we have a very honest dialogue, talking about good practices and achievements, as well as challenges and obstacles. And the objective is that by the end of these 2 days, we go back to our respective institutions and countries being clear about what the next steps will be, and with a commitment to continue and reinforce social protections in our specific context. So I would like to here introduce now the panel of speakers. We will start with Madame Monique Paria, who is the Director General in DG Humanitarian Aid and Civil Protection. And under her leadership, we have seen how ECHO has become more efficient, gender sensitive, and also it remains very open to dialogue with partners, and we appreciate that very much. So, Madame Paria, you have the floor.
Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, excellencies. It's a great pleasure to be with you today and to open this International Conference on Social Protection in the context of fragilities and forced displacement. Let me first of all thank the organizers and welcome all the delegations that have traveled to Brussels, and I know some of you come from very far away, to be here with us today to discuss this important topic. You have a fascinating 2 days program ahead of you, and I would like to wish you very productive discussions. The challenges we need to address today are huge, larger than ever before. We live in a world of 7 billion people where inequalities are growing and where climate change is also reshaping the traditional livelihood patterns of nations. After steadily declining for over a decade, global hunger is now on the rise again, affecting 815 million people in 2016, which is about 11% of the global population. We are also witnessing displacement on an unprecedented scale, caused by largely protracted conflicts and natural disasters. And when I say natural disaster, I always say there is no natural disaster in itself. It's natural hazards that turn into disasters because of poverty, because of unpreparedness, because of conflicts, because of many reasons. More than 65 million people worldwide are either refugees or internally displaced people. That was the figures we had in 2017, and I'm afraid this will continue to grow. This is the highest number since World War II. At the same time, today's crises have become more complex and more protracted. On average, 80% of humanitarian crises last for 5 years or more. Think of Syria, of Iraq, of South Sudan, of Yemen. And these cases, however major, are only parts of the overall picture. 250 million people are affected by humanitarian crises globally. So it's no surprise that the needs have outpaced everything that we had seen before, stretching our response capacity to the breaking point. And yet, we all know that humanitarian aid is not a solution to protracted needs or conflicts. So they need to be a political solution, but unfortunately, we have to address those humanitarian needs in the meantime. And as said, since those crises are protracted, we need to work on also on more long-term solution. This is why this conference is so relevant. The need for closer cooperation between humanitarian and development actors is more pressing than ever. Working hand in hand can replace the so-called humanitarian development divide with a more coordinated and effective approach to response, where humanitarian and development actors engage with each other from the onset. Ladies and gentlemen, in the face of unprecedented needs, it is now a crucial time to invest in enhancing local capacities, reducing risk, and building resilience, especially in fragile contexts. Social protection is clearly a promising avenue for achieving these goals. When framed correctly, social protection systems can play an important role in helping vulnerable people to meet their basic needs. In the last years, humanitarian actors have increasingly come to understand how cash transfers can provide quick, efficient, and dignified support in context of fragility and forced displacement, as well as in response to sudden onset disasters. Cash-based assistance is quick to deliver, cost-effective, and it provides people in need with greater choice. This is why, for 2016, over half of the European Commission's humanitarian food assistance was provided in the form of cash assistance. However, humanitarian cash interventions are most of the time designed as short-term actions, not always aligned with national safety nets or broader social protection system where there exist. In order to be more effective, we should align them with national social protection system where they exist, or even support the adaptation of the national systems to target vulnerable populations and to respond to shocks and crises when they occur. This is not something that humanitarians can do alone. To achieve this, we need to work closely, as said before, with our development colleagues and with national authorities. In practice, what does it mean? And I'll give you a few examples of how we have implemented it. Last year, the European Commission launched the Emergency Social Safety Net for Syrian refugees living in Turkey. This is the largest ever humanitarian aid project funded by the European Union. It is also the first humanitarian social assistance program fully aligned with the national safety net, which is the one of the Turkish authorities. The program is a model for cost efficiency and cost effectiveness. cash transfer through electronic cash reach about 1 million refugees every month. So we have achieved the target of 1 million refugees, and we will actually celebrate that very shortly. It allows them to cover their basic needs, be them rent, food, protection, school for the children, and they can decide whatever they use the money for. And it gives them also a sense of normality and also some dignity also in their life and in the choice and in making their own choice of what is most needed for them. And another element which is also very important is that those transactions help also the local economy, because where do they buy their food or rent their apartments or get social services? It's locally, and it's a big driver also for boosting the local economy and for having a sort of better integration of refugees and local communities. In Malawi, the EU is supporting the government to expand its existing safety net, social safety net, and make it shock responsive so it can expand to cover new beneficiaries or new geographical areas in case of natural disaster. Ethiopia is another good example. With other donors, we are working on making the National Productive Safety Net program scalable so it can respond to the ongoing food crisis. For Lesotho, we are supporting an initiative to enhance a national cash for work program that targets the most vulnerable. And finally, in the case of Somalia, to be discussed this morning, could current humanitarian and development assistance, especially through cash transfers, become an option to build the foundation of a social safety net program for the chronically food insecure. I look forward to the discussions in the panel today about this possibility. Ladies and gentlemen, excellencies, as I have tried to illustrate, social protection holds the potential to put the humanitarian development nexus into practice by preserving principled humanitarian action while contributing to building larger local perspectives, larger long-term perspectives, for the people we serve. When humanitarian crises become protracted, one needs predictability and long-term solution. We cannot continue to think only short-term. We need long-term vision that combines humanitarian assistance with development action, since tackling humanitarian basic survival needs is increasingly not enough and increasingly more protracted. This is especially important if we want to eradicate global hunger once for all. Our collective work, your work today, is essential today, and not only today, but also in the field, is essential to help all those in need around the world. We count on you for that. We have to act together to deliver on the promise of leaving no one behind. Thank you for gathering here today and tomorrow, for working on practical solutions, for providing us with good proposals. We are here to support you, but you are the doers more than us. And I thank you very much for the good work you all provide everywhere in the world in support of all those who are in need. I wish you all a very fruitful conference, very constructive works, and I'm looking forward to get the result of it. And I thank you very much for your attention. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Case for social protection and showing how in very practical ways we can bring this nexus humanitarian assistance and development together. It is now my pleasure to invite Mrs. Ingrid Gabriela Oven, Director General of BMZ, who comes, I can see from the bio, with many years of experience in development. So we look forward to your statement, Ms. Oven.
Mrs. Blanchet, Mrs. Paria, Mrs. Yaga, Mr. Chabin, Excellencies, Ministers, colleagues and partners, ladies and gentlemen, good morning and a warm welcome to all of you on behalf of the Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. It's really a pleasure for me to be here at this very important international conference on social protection in context of fragility and forced displacement. Certainly, we are happy to see that we have a growing family of social protection partners, governments, think tanks, practitioners, and you are gathered here in Brussels. And I think this is a very good opportunity at a very important moment in time, as Mrs. Paria has laid out, because the crisis hasn't ended. We see growing numbers actually with respect to hunger and suffering of people. And certainly this is a good moment to reflect upon what we have achieved so far with the tools that we have put in place over the last couple of years, and to see whether we can even do better and be more and achieve more long-lasting, more structural effects over the medium and longer term. But at the same time, we shouldn't get out of sight the immediate needs of so many people and families that are suffering today. Looking back, I think the debate and the practical experience through an increased emergency response in the Middle East, in combating the crisis in Syria, but also the new and emerging fragilities in Africa, and sometimes very difficult prevailing situations in some countries, I think we have actually laid the foundations for a better combination of different tools that have been emerging out of the humanitarian system and the development cooperation system. Certainly we have understood that we have to pay more attention to social protection as such. Secondly, I think we have learned a little bit more how do we actually strengthen the system on social protection even in fragile contexts, in order to make sure that in the medium and longer term we can build up the resilience of people and institutions so that we can better prevent that again crises reappear in the first place. And thirdly, I think we have learned a lot how we can use the existing tools such as cash transfer, cash for work programs, etc., all the types of immediate response that we have developed especially under crisis to meet people's needs. And certainly when we look into those crisis regions, we always should bear in mind it's not only about those that have been forcibly displaced due to crisis or conflict, but also we have to bear in mind that normally those people are within countries. We have host communities and host countries also with their needs in order to protect their own people. People that are poor, people that are suffering, that certainly don't have a secure livelihood. So what should be, when we look into this experience, I would say that we would actually agree on the principle that everyone can need social protection at some point in their lives. And at least we in Europe, coming from industrialized countries, considering that we don't have a security system at our disposal is something that we consider as almost unthinkable. This is a cornerstone of our well-being. But we know that in many countries those systems are at a very emerging stage, and sometimes they're even at least fragile. And in order to do better in the social protection arena, I think we have to put in place many pieces that still perhaps provide right now more a patchy picture and haven't come together as they should. For instance, we often think of cash and in-kind transfer as the first means in context of fragility and forced displacement. However, We also have to take more efforts to ensure that when choosing which instruments to use and how to apply them, careful attention is given to the specific context in order to allow appropriate adaptation. Cash transfer, for example, can only really come into their own where there are functional markets. Furthermore, the full range of social protection instruments available in the wider development context, including social insurance, labor market protection, or the new emerging climate risk insurance schemes, should be considered and adapted. We have to bring those different silos together in order to build a strong social protection fabric. In the German Development Cooperation Assistance, or when I even speak broad on the German response to crisis and fragility, we certainly, one would say, we have partially a unique institutional setup. Actually, our tools are like split up into three different areas. First, of course, we have the classic humanitarian assistance at our disposal. Secondly, of course, we continue to increase our development cooperation assistance also to those countries most in need and in the crisis context. Additionally, we have developed what we call some kind of a transitional assistance, and this type of tool that should bridge actually and should work on the nexus between the humanitarian and the development assistance. It's not something that we have simply invented for the Syria crisis, but has been in place in our setup for quite a while, because we have realized, especially when we started to work on crisis in Africa, that this type of a more immediate response that at the same time can build up institution structures and build a bridge into the more longer-term structural development cooperation is needed. So, in principle, this type of three instruments, they aim to both meet the immediate needs, for instance, through temporary transfer links to capacity development that strengthen the resilience of people, their communities, and also structures on the ground. And secondly, the second goal, of course, is to promote development of longer-term sustainable social protection systems that are inclusive and thus leave no one behind. So Germany supports cash transfers, cash for work programs, and also additional measures that go beyond social assistance, for instance, such as climate risk insurance schemes. Certainly, we recognize the potentially transformative power of cash transfer in the context of fragility and forced displacement. Therefore, we are increasingly using transfers wherever possible as an important tool with which to stabilize livelihoods, strengthen resilience, and rebuild basic social infrastructure in local markets. This also helps people and households to avoid negative coping strategies, such as taking children out of school or cashing in or consuming valuable assets. We have also already heard very good examples by Madame Paria how cash transfer can work in a different context, and we have made actually similar experiences using cash. For instance, in a project in the northern Iraq to secure livelihoods, and the approach uses cash for work with the aim of providing nearly 27,000 effective households with additional income, as well as making social transfers to an additional 6,000 households by supporting rehabilitation and the rebuilding of public buildings and infrastructure in these communities. But certainly, cash is not everything. And from the very beginning, even if we install such an approach, we try to combine it with a more long-lasting provision of social services, like water, health, schooling. So to achieve longer-term results, create perspectives for the communities affected, but at the same time also start to build up institutions. And with regard to systems building, we should also learn from experiencing countries affected by natural or economic shocks. We need to learn, for example, how the reach of intervention could be temporarily scaled up in a short amount of time, or how emergency response measures could form building blocks for social protection systems. Across all measures, certainly we try to aim to embed and ensure the sustainability of interventions as early as possible, also financially. So in a nutshell, and these are like the guiding blocks for the future when it comes to our cooperation and our assistance in those very difficult regions and under fragility and crisis. Certainly, in the context of increased fragility and crisis, our primary concern is to provide rapidly effective solutions to meet the basic needs of the most vulnerable. At the same time, we would like to strengthen their resilience and to enable people to improve their situation by themselves. And where social protection programs exist, and this is the second aim, we aim to adapt them to situations of increased fragility and forced displacement. So we try to link the temporary intervention that we finance with existing structures so that we can really reinforce these programs for the benefit of all. To a certain extent, those two work streams have to be mutually reinforcing. And thirdly, and this is certainly something that lies ahead of us, what we see right now, as I said, we see a patchy picture of different tools in the field of resilience building, whether it be for displaced people or in the context of fragility. So we see like silos, partially tools that have been developed under humanitarian assistance in a quick response to the immediate needs of people, quite understandably. We see an emerging new tool of instruments stemming out the debate on how do we deal with the new risks that stem out of climate change, climate risk insurance, for instance. And thirdly, we see an emerging role for cash for work programs that at the same time have a benefit to secure livelihoods. But again, all these are like vertical programs coming out of specific work streams. What we are missing right now is actually whether we could build systems in countries on the ground that are long-standing, robust, sufficiently robust, and that could actually deal with the different types of shocks and crises that a country may face. For instance, Senegal. This year, perhaps it might be a drought. Next year, floods. And the year thereafter, perhaps a partial regionally political conflict with people suffering from because they are don't have any income that can actually sustain their livelihoods. So I think this is actually the challenge ahead of us. And if we could somehow join forces to make this picture complete, connect the dots, and make sure that we have an increased effectiveness in our doing, either in the humanitarian or in the development cooperation system, I think we could really make a good service to the many people that I need. Many thanks.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Hoven, for sharing the experience and principles of Germany. I think we will discuss during this conference more about how we need to integrate these different systems and avoid building silos, but rather strengthen systems so that the resilience of societies, communities, and families and people can be sustained no matter what the nature of the emergency or the crisis. I'm now very pleased to introduce Margareta Jager, who is the Deputy Director General of the Directorate General for International Cooperation and Development. Mrs. Jager, the floor is yours.
Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends. I'm grateful for this opportunity to address a conference on social protection in the context of fragility and forced displacement. The thorough analysis from multidimensional perspectives of tackling current challenges is exactly the type of discussion we need. Therefore, I would say this conference is a great opportunity to address that. As Monique said before, too many people around the globe still lack access to basic services and decent living conditions. And she also mentioned the enormous potential and importance of social protection as a policy instrument. From the DGDEFCO perspective, I cannot agree more, and I want to state that both the humanitarian development nexus and the aspect related to forced displacement has become the core business of our DG. So both the Agenda 2030 and the new European Consensus for Development acknowledge the social protection as a proven cross-cutting instrument to combat poverty and inequalities. Regarding the fragility and forced displacement, we need to gather more evidence. So my pledge to you today is help us to gather more data and more evidence based to see when and what kind of social protection we need in order to avert and relieve humanitarian disasters and to utilize its potential to transform the interventions into the development processes contributing to achieve resilience, peace, stabilization, and economic growth. At the World Humanitarian Summit, it was agreed to increase the social protection program and to strengthen national and local system and coping mechanism in order to build the resilience in fragile context. We all know that these commitments are extremely challenging to implement. So today, many countries, not to mention those in crisis, face major obstacles to provide appropriate tax-funded, citizen-based and social policies. And therefore, programs for displaced persons may provide greater quality of service than the social protection of the host country can offer to its own population, as mentioned before by Mrs. Hoven. And we all know that that may create tensions. So therefore, building the ground for investment in development through humanitarian interventions, and by doing so, preparing existing state-led social protection system to deliver humanitarian support in the time of crisis is the way forward. Such new paradigm for humanitarian development nexus will require strong political support, and we do count on you to help us doing that as well. So this includes providing an enabling environment for social protection and also national social protection strategy, putting efforts on preparing a legal framework, building accountable institutions, regain the trust, and promoting redistributions of the fundamental long-term policy goals. It is a learning challenge, not only for the policymakers, but also for humanitarian in development practitioners, researchers specialized in social protection, as well as migration experts. Therefore, again, I am looking forward to today's discussion and the result of this conference. Monique has mentioned so many good examples and best practices. I can only confirm that the European Commission Development and Humanitarian arms are coordinating closely on social protection. So as a visible product, I can only mention the guidance package for social protection across the humanitarian development nexus. And since she quoted all the good examples, I may only add Malawi on the list, that it's also with the social cash transfer demonstrates that synergies, that good coordination between humanitarian and development actors can help and release. So to conclude, ladies and gentlemen, social protection is fundamental instrument and not only address poverty and inequalities, but also helps managing disasters in more predictable ways. The role of social protection in the relationship between humanitarian, migration, and development policy is a powerful one, but as I said before, we need to understand better and we need to make it more operational. The high expectations are there, but we are all here to work together in order to enable tangible contribution to human capital development in this difficult context, and this is a very, very challenging agenda. So let me conclude by underlining the fact that the European Union shares the common aim to better target our social protection-related intervention in partner countries in such a way that they can have a positive impact on development agendas in the countries facing really fragility and forced displacement. So I wish you a very stimulating conference and rely on your work to give us evidence-based, really good data and evidence in order to meet the high expectations. And we are waiting for the recommendation, and we are looking forward to work with you in the future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. Jager. And I think we have all heard your call for more evidence, and I really hope that this conference will contribute to building this evidence and documenting the good practices and move forward, because as you said, the Nexus Humanitarian Development is it's a complex one, and we need to develop it further. And I think also your point about supporting displaced people, but also the local population was also made by previous speakers, and that's key to the approach. I'm now very pleased to introduce Mr. Tate Scheiben. I cannot help but notice that we have a fairly gender imbalanced panel today, for once in the other direction, so I think it's quite, we have to be fair, but Mr. Scheiben, of course, comes with decades of experience in actually humanitarian assistance and development, so the quality is certainly there. So Mr. Scheiben, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, and Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, colleagues, it's really a pleasure to be with you here today. As we sit here, there's 65 million people who are forcibly displaced around the world, of which 22 million are refugees. And even larger numbers are living in countries where ongoing conflict and complex political environments make everyday life challenging, where families struggle to earn a living and where government finds it particularly challenging to provide social services. If we don't address the needs of these people, we're going to set in motion an intergenerational cycle of poverty and deprivation. And what we're meaning to discuss over the next 2 days is the importance of social protection and its role in breaking that cycle. And we have to remember that social protection is, of course, cash transfer, but it's also public works, it's health insurance, it's social support and care services. And all of that constitute a safety net, a source of support for families. It helps build the capacities of households, of communities, and indeed countries to withstand shocks and crises and recover more quickly when those shocks occur. Social protection provision has grown around the world, and we have an important opportunity to ensure that its expansion is informed by experience and all you bring over the next 2 days to this conference. The growth of unconditional cash transfers as a form of humanitarian assistance is another significant opportunity to strengthen and expand longer-term social protection systems. Cash transfer, as opposed to handing out NFI kits or other forms of assistance, help preserve the dignity of recipients and give them the flexibility to make choices in meeting their needs. They're particularly effective, as has already been mentioned, when other services related to health, education, nutrition, and water and sanitation are also available and work in conjunction. The international community has recognized that cash responses are more tenable and sustainable if these are embedded and reinforced to the development of longer-term national social protection systems. And our experience in UNICEF supports this conclusion, since such systems provide measures to quickly identify those in need, but also link them to existing services. A number of examples have already been indicated, and I'd like to speak to a range of context. I think we all remember the situation that occurred in Nepal and the Philippines with national disasters and 2013 and 15. And in both those cases, the existing social protection system was able to expand to take into account people displaced, in that case by a natural disaster, absorb that population and provide them quickly using existing systems with support. But now turning to the context that this conference is about, which is more fragile context, conflict context. There are a number of existing good practices, and the next 2 days will give us many more. But I'd like to mention here Turkey, Pakistan, Yemen, places which have dealt with either displacements and conflict within or from neighboring countries and use existing social protection measures to address the needs of that population at its deepest and darkest hour. And nor is it only in response that these examples are useful. One thinks, for example, of the Hunger Safety Net program in Kenya, which has invested in preparedness of its social protection system so that when there is an emergency, this program, tied with early warning and trigger systems, can absorb new recipients in the event of a crisis. And as our colleague Monique Paria has already indicated, such measures and such systems can be used, can be utilized, can be put in place in even the more complex and the most complex of environments. And we'll hear during the conference from our colleagues from Somalia how the government has taken steps to put in place a social protection system in that country. So over the next 2 days, we really look forward to hearing these experiences, learning from each other. All told, globally, there's 130 countries around the world that have some form of social protection program in place, including cash transfers, another program that help people access basic goods and services. And it's very clear that those programs make a huge difference in reducing poverty, reducing inequality, and childhood deprivation. If I can just pause one moment on children being UNICEF. It's specifically important to children that they have access to these programs. Impact evaluations show time and time again how unconditional cash transfers and social protection measures more broadly mean that children are more likely to be in school and less likely to be at work. Mean that children are more likely to seek health care. Mean that children are better able to benefit from household food security. And these are differences that are particularly important in families where poverty and deprivation prevails, but imagine how important they are in families that are affected by displacement and conflict. I think the international consensus and common sense is that when we do humanitarian action, we should do it in a way that looks at the longer term perspective, that looks at systemically trying to affect change. Humanitarian action needs to build on existing social protection systems while staying true to humanitarian principles where these exist, or in places where those systems do not exist, it needs to work in a manner that helps sets up such systems while being mindful of the financial sustainability, being mindful of transferring skills so that these can be sustained in the longer term. Having strong social protection systems in place that are risk-informed and are able to respond to crisis in a timely manner is crucial to building resilience, but also sustaining humanitarian responses. So with all of that in mind, all of the setup that has happened from the speakers that have spoken in this panel, we've come together, UNICEF, the EU, UN, government, bilateral partners, and all of you, to share lessons about both the successes and challenges in making social protection a viable tool, even in the most complex environments, and specifically in those environments where protracted conflict or mass forced displacement have strained systems beyond all expectations. Our intention is to prepare ourselves to act with resolve to operationalize commitments already agreed to. We expect to deepen our knowledge and expertise based on real lessons on the ground so that we can act, and to strengthen existing partnerships or forge new ones so that we can move forward on this agenda in ways which makes a real difference in the lives of affected people and communities. We're glad that so many governments, so many partners who are grappling with these challenges are here, civil society organizations, researchers. All of you are directly involved in this work, and that's what makes this conference so special. By listening to each other, by bringing our knowledge together, we can amplify what we have done individually and hopefully accelerate the work that we have already been engaged with for the world's most vulnerable. By the end of these 2 days, we expect to have a much clearer idea of how we can use what we have learned here to make good on the relevant commitments of Agenda 2030, the SDGs, Goal 1 in particular, to end all forms of poverty and the commitment to leave no one behind, the World Humanitarian Summit, and also let's not forget the New York Declaration on Migrants and Refugees and addressing mixed migrant flows. We hope to have a draft document which will be prepared and shared, summarizing concrete actions to operationalize these commitments in the countries where we live and work and for the people we serve. So during the course of this meeting, let us consider how we can turn lessons learned and best practices into systemic action, how we can build on existing social protection systems to respond to the short and long-term needs of people affected by crisis, and prepare these to be ready for new shocks. And then conversely, where these systems don't exist or are defunct, design humanitarian cash transfer programs in a manner that leads to fiscal sustainability, scalability, and transfer of skills. And continue with evidence sharing and information sharing. Colleagues, as we share, learn, and debate and listen over the next 2 days, let us keep in mind the men, women, and children in the context of conflict and forced displacement at the center of our discussion. Let's picture a child or a family that we've met and think how what we're discussing over the next 2 days can make a real difference to them. And if over the next 2 days we think, sitting here on Friday night, that we're in a better place to help those people, then it would have been 2 days well spent in a beautiful location. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Ted, for highlighting the role of social protection in breaking the intergenerational cycle of poverty and deprivation. I could see a lot of heads nodding on this, and the focus on children was welcomed by everyone. So I think it was an important thing to keep in mind. And of course, the need to not only focus on cash transfers, but also the accompanying services. And this was also mentioned by previous speakers. Cash itself is necessary but not sufficient. We also need to ensure access to health services, education, water, sanitation, and nutrition. So I think this brings to the end the first panel. Thank you very much to all the panelists. And we will now leave the space for the second panel, and Sarah Cook will be chairing it. Thank you very much.